You have probably heard that Budapest is beautiful. You may have seen the photograph, Parliament in gold light reflected in black water, the chain bridge in the foreground, Buda Castle on the hill behind. It is a very good photograph. It is also, in a sense, the problem. Budapest is the only European capital that was actually two cities until quite recently. Buda and Pest met across the Danube for centuries as separate municipalities, each with its own mayor, its own character, its own argument about what a city on this river should be. In 1873, they were merged. Along with a third town, Óbuda, they became Budapest. Whether that merger was ever completed is a question Budapestians tend to answer differently depending on which bank they grew up on. The Danube is not a background detail here. It is not a postcard. It is the structural fact of the city. Everything else, the politics, the architecture, the social geography, the daily rhythm of life, is organized in relation to that divide. You are on one side of the river or the other. The bridges are how you get to the other version of the city. And somehow Budapest is both at once, with very little effort made to pretend they are the same place. What is life in Budapest actually like today? The Danube through Budapest is wider than most first-time visitors expect. It is also faster and darker and less ceremonial than the name implies. This is not the Danube of Strauss waltzes. It is a working river, a border river, a river that has flooded the city more than once and will flood it again. The river banks on the Pest side, the flat eastern bank, were the site of ambitious urban renewal in the late 19th century, when the Austro-Hungarian Empire decided that Budapest should look like a capital worth having. The grand boulevards behind the Danube embankment were designed around the same time as Paris's Haussmann renovation, by engineers who had been paying close attention. The Buda side has the castle, it has the hills, it has the view. The asymmetry was always there. Pest builds outward, Buda holds itself above. That difference in posture has not changed. Buda is the quieter city. It rises from the Danube in layers, the riverbank, then the castle district on the plateau above, then the residential hills behind. The streets in the castle district are cobblestoned and narrow, and the buildings are uniformly Habsburg in their restraint, cream plaster, grey stone, arched windows that suggest importance without shouting it. On a weekday morning, it is nearly silent. The tourists have not yet arrived from their hotels across the water. The view from Castle Hill is the view in the photograph. Pest laid out flat on the opposite bank. The grand synagogue dome visible. The Parliament building's neo-Gothic spires pulling the eye north. On a clear morning, you can see the Danube bending southward toward the horizon. Pest is where most people live. It is flat, almost entirely so, and dense, layered, worn in a way that Buda is not. The grand boulevard curves through the city, lined with buildings that were once among the most ambitious residential architecture on the continent, and are now, depending on the block, either beautifully restored or held together by collective indifference. Both conditions exist within 50 meters of each other. This is not neglect exactly. It is more that Budapest has more history than it has had resources to deal with. The Austro-Hungarian period built grandly. The Second World War damaged heavily. The Soviet period repaired cheaply and added more cheaply still. What you walk through in Pest is a palimpsest. Every era visible, nothing resolved. The food reflects the same layering. Hungarian cuisine is Central European in its heaviness. Paprika, pork fat, stews that take most of the day. The coffee culture is Viennese, with the old Kaffeehäuser, the marble tabletops, the practiced habit of sitting for hours over a single espresso. Lunch is a goulash. The afternoon is a flat white and a window seat. The language is the other thing. Hungarian is not related to any other European language in practical terms. It belongs to the Uralic family, distantly connected to Finnish and Estonian. But the resemblance is academic. There are no footholds. The words look like nothing you have seen before. Locals understand this, and most under 50 speak English without complaint. But the language marks a boundary that is different from geography. Budapest is a thermal city. The phrase sounds like marketing, and in some places it is used that way. It is also simply a geological fact. The city sits on a fault line between two tectonic plates, and the rock underneath is porous limestone that has been filtering and heating groundwater for millions of years. There are 118 documented natural hot springs inside the city limits. The consequence is that Budapest has been bathing publicly since the Ottoman period, when the Turks built hammams that still function today. The Habsburg era added grand spa palaces, Szechenyi in City Park, Gellert on the Buda side, designed to look like the inside of an opera house. High ceilings, mosaics, natural light through amber glass domes. The water temperature in the main pools runs between 36 and 40 degrees Celsius. The morning ritual at Szechenyi, the largest thermal bath complex in Europe, begins before 8 o'clock. The early visitors are not tourists. They are older men and women who have been coming for decades, pensioners, regulars, people for whom the bath is not a leisure activity, but a medical appointment, a social obligation, a form of maintenance. They bring their own towels. They know which locker number they prefer. Some of them play chess on floating boards in the outdoor pool, a photograph that has appeared in every travel article written about this city for 40 years, and which is, nevertheless, an accurate description of something that actually happens every morning. Foreigners discover the baths and find them transformative. Locals use them the way other cities use coffee shops, as neutral social infrastructure, a place to sit with someone you know or someone you want to know, at a temperature that makes conversation easy. The thermal bath is also the clearest sign of something particular to Budapest. The city has an unusually high capacity for stillness. It is a capital with capital city traffic and capital city noise, and yet the rhythm underneath is slower than you would expect. People sit in hot water for 2 hours on a Tuesday morning. Restaurants still run lunch service from noon well into the afternoon. The coffee house tradition survives commercially in a way that the equivalent has not in Paris or Vienna. Whether this is cultural, climatic, or simply because Budapest is not as fast as the cities it competes with for attention, is hard to say. The baths do not explain it entirely, but they are the most visible expression of it. A city that built, centuries ago, the infrastructure of not hurrying and has continued to use it. The Jewish quarter in Pest contains the Dohany Street Synagogue, the second largest synagogue in the world, with space for 3,000 worshippers, and it also contains, within 200 meters, some of the better-known ruin bars on the continent. The ruin bars are what they sound like. They began in the early 2000s as temporary installations in abandoned Jewish quarter buildings, left derelict after the Second World War and the subsequent decades of communist indifference. Local entrepreneurs took the ruins on short leases, installed mismatched furniture, decorated with salvaged objects, opened bars. Simpler Kurt, which opened in 2002, became internationally known. The others followed. The quarter now has a density of late-night venues that most European cities of comparable size do not. The juxtaposition is not comfortable if you hold the history in mind. The quarter was a ghetto during the war. The buildings that became ruin bars were emptied. What happened to the people inside them is part of the record. The current use of the space has been criticized and defended, in roughly equal measure, by everyone with a stake in the argument. What the ruin bars did, unintentionally, was make the Jewish quarter into one of the most photographed neighborhoods in Budapest. That attention eventually funded restoration and a return of the residential population that had been declining for 60 years. The synagogue, which had been in serious disrepair by the 1980s, received major restoration funding, partly because the neighborhood around it had become worth caring about again. Outside the Jewish quarter, Pest carries a different kind of inheritance. The Soviet-era housing blocks, the Panel Hazak, were built in the 1960s and 1970s on the outer ring of the city. They were functional, ideological, and designed without apparent interest in whether the people inside them would be comfortable. They still house a large portion of Budapest's population. They have been renovated, insulated, painted in cautious earth tones. They are lived in, maintained, endured. Budapestians who grew up in them have a complicated relationship with that era. The things it provided, guaranteed employment, heavily subsidized housing, a certain enforced social equality, are not forgotten. Neither is the surveillance, the shortage, the restricted movement, the knowledge that history was being officially rewritten. The conversation about what that period meant is ongoing, and it is not a simple one. What Budapest did with the Soviet inheritance that is most visible is transform it into texture. The peeling facades, the industrial courtyards, the overscale municipal buildings are, for a generation that did not live through them, aesthetic. For the generation that did, they are something else. The city contains both readings at once. Budapest faces a version of the same question that Lisbon faces, that Prague faces, that most Central European capitals of a certain size and beauty face. What happens when the city is noticed? Rents in Central Pest have risen enough over the past decade that many of the people who grew up there have moved to the outer districts or left Hungary entirely. Hungary has one of the higher emigration rates among European Union member states. Mostly young, educated, professionally mobile people moving to Germany, the United Kingdom, Austria. The reasons are economic, but they are also political. People who have left tend to describe the same thing, a narrowing of the space for certain kinds of life. The digital nomads and remote workers who have arrived to fill some of that space are, by and large, not aware of this. Budapest is cheap relative to Western European capitals. The internet is fast. The coffee houses still have marble tabletops. The baths are open. For a certain international professional class, it is close to ideal. The tension this creates is not different in kind from what other cities absorb when this demographic arrives. It may be sharper in Budapest because the people leaving and the people arriving are moving through each other. The local generation that could have afforded to stay, leaving. The international generation that could not afford to stay elsewhere, arriving. Whether this resolves into something stable or deepens is a question the city is living through rather than answering. In the evening, from the fisherman's bastion on the Buda side, you can watch the light change over Pest. Parliament turns gold before the sky does. The chain bridge lights up, and then the Elizabeth Bridge, and then the others in sequence, a string of illuminated crossings over dark water. The Danube at this hour is the city's best argument. Budapest has been through a considerable amount. It was the western edge of the Ottoman Empire, then the eastern anchor of the Austro-Hungarian. It was heavily damaged in the Second World War, then occupied, then liberated into a different occupation, then liberated again in 1989 into something it is still figuring out. Each of those periods left something behind: a bathhouse, a boulevard, a bullet hole that was never filled, a synagogue that almost did not survive. What the city has, which most cities do not, is the river. The Danube keeps the argument between Buda and Pest alive, which keeps the city from settling into a single version of itself. And from the fisherman's bastion in the evening, with Parliament lit and the bridges strung across the darkness, it is very hard to argue that this is not enough.